Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, dear colleagues, I'm pleased to welcome you to this webinar of the 5th annual meeting of the African Wildlife Forensic Network. My name is Armand Biko, the coordinator of the African Wildlife Forensic Network, and I will be chairing this webinar, which will run from 1 p.m. Central African Time for 90 minutes. This webinar represents an addition to this year's AWFN meeting. It is an open session designed to give our external stakeholders an introduction to the network. I see that we have 75 people signing in at the moment. 2020 has been an exceptional and unusual year in many respects. After last year's network meeting in Livingstone, Zambia, this year's meeting was planned to be held in Kilimanjaro, Tanzania. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic made it impossible to travel, and we were forced to change this meeting into an online format. The webinar will be composed of pre-recorded presentation. However, all presenters will be available to answer your questions live during the question and answer sessions. Please type your questions in the question and answer box. We may have time to address a few questions between talks, but most will be discussed at the end of the webinar. The following team members from the NGO Trace Wildlife Forensic Network and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, will guide you live through the sessions. It will be myself, Armand Biko, AWFN coordinator and chair of this webinar, Dr. Simon Jures, or rather Simon Jures, technical advisor to Trace. He will handle the technical support of this webinar. Dr. Stephanie Pitch, Southern Africa Program Coordinator of Trace, will moderate the question and answer sessions. Dr. Rob Ogden, Director of Trace, and Sinead Brophy, UNODC's Wildlife Forensic Focal Point, will both handle the final question and answer session and closing remarks at the end of this webinar. For those of you who have been with us since Monday, we hope that you have enjoyed the meeting so far and that we will be able to have a physical meeting with personal interactions next year. For those who are joining us only today for this open session, thank you for your interest to learn more about the African Wildlife Forensic Network. We hope that you will enjoy this webinar and that at the end of the day, you will have a better understanding of the African Wildlife Forensic Network activity. Today's webinar will have 4 sessions of 3 presentations each, followed by question and answers. We will hear from African countries and from international organizations about their work in wildlife forensics and their involvement with the network. Now, we will begin with the first session. Firstly, Dr. Rob Ogden of Trace will talk to us about wildlife crime scene investigations and wildlife forensic laboratory analysis. Trace is leading the development and expansion of the African Wildlife Forensic Network. The second presentation will be given by myself as the coordinator of the network, introducing the network itself, its mission and objectives, and highlighting some of its activities. Please remember to put any questions you may have in the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Rob Ogden. I'm a wildlife forensic scientist working for TRACE and have been involved in the African Wildlife Forensics Network since it began. My role here today is to provide you with a brief introduction to wildlife forensic science and crime scene investigation and how they can be developed to support wildlife law enforcement in Africa. To start with, let's step back and look at a general model of the illegal wildlife trade. We see a number of forms of illegal exploitation, from capture of live animals for the pet trade to illegal killing of protected species and illegal harvest of plants and animals, such as timber and fish, where legitimate industries become compromised by laundering of illegally sourced products. All of these feed into supply chains with local or international traders, retailers, and different types of end user. Tackling these issues requires a multifaceted response. This includes reducing supply and demand at either end and regulating local and international trade in between. Wildlife law enforcement tends to focus on investigating the illegal trade elements using a range of direct and ancillary legislation. Wildlife law enforcement officers face various investigative challenges. Some of these are common to all types of crime, but others are more specific to wildlife. Often, the immediate perpetrator is easy to identify, but it's necessary to demonstrate that a crime is actually being committed, the exact opposite of most human victim crime. Identifying non-human biological evidence is a key challenge, with investigators potentially needing to prove the species, geographic origin, or wild versus captive source of wildlife parts and products. Sometimes age and cause of death are also required. These pictures show a range of plant and animal seizures requiring identification. The collection and analysis of forensic evidence to support wildlife law enforcement investigations can be essential to the successful prosecution of cases. Wildlife crime scene investigation is a general term used to describe different actions that take place where evidence of a crime may be present. In fact, there are a number of distinct crime scene roles that usually get designated to officers with different levels of experience. First responders are trained to recognize and secure crime scenes. Crime scene managers may have a mandate to search, document, and collect evidence, while a crime scene investigator will have a more senior decision-making role. However, at remote wildlife crime scenes, the reality on the ground is that ranger patrols may need to adopt and cover all of these roles, making it particularly important that everyone has high-quality training. Furthermore, crime scene officers are responsible for collecting all types of evidence, no matter which forensic laboratory it's sent to, requiring a broad level of evidential knowledge. Wildlife forensics is sometimes defined as the forensic identification of non-human evidence. Alternatively, it can be more broadly used to describe all evidence relating to a wildlife crime. Either way, the purpose of the analysis, to address a legal question, means that forensic science is not just a fancy name for a standard lab test. Methods first require validation. They then have to be employed within a quality management system. And all of this needs to be securely performed while maintaining an evidential chain of custody. These requirements make it extremely difficult for forensic tests to be performed at, for example, university labs. For identifying wildlife, traditional morphology and common DNA analyses are the most widely available approaches to evidence identification. Other methods are also used in some circumstances in specialist labs. So, how can we ensure that national law enforcement agencies have access to wildlife forensic services to support their work? The whole process, from crime scene to courtroom, is interdependent, meaning that capacity is required throughout. Furthermore, forensic analysis relies on some level of scientific infrastructure and capability, usually within the country where the investigation is taking place. But if these can be put in place and maintained, there's huge potential to increase convictions at all levels of criminality. The requirement for interagency collaboration and scientific development can initially limit or even prevent the application of forensic science. But on the other hand, a coordinated forensic capacity building program can catalyse the development of national law enforcement capacity, precisely because it's cross-cutting in nature. It's also worth noting that for most investigative questions, wildlife forensics is not limited by the availability of tests or tech. The tools are already out there, we just need to use them properly. So in my last slide, I wanted to show you the route that we've taken to build capacity across the board. At an operational level, the two main pillars of focus are the wildlife crime scene and forensic laboratory practitioners. They require support to develop robust systems and protocols, to deliver staff training, and to maintain facilities to ensure that evidence is correctly collected, transferred, analysed, and reported. At either end, forensic awareness within senior investigators and the legal profession is also essential. Underpinning this pipeline is a series of standards agreed internationally that cover not just operational activities themselves, but how training is delivered and maintained to the necessary level. And sitting above all of this is the network that enables scientists and crime scene practitioners to exchange ideas, identify issues, break down barriers, and ultimately facilitate casework which relies so heavily on effective communication. This is the African Wildlife Forensics Network, and I'll now hand over to its coordinator, Armand Bikuo, to introduce it to you. Thank you very much.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to my presentation about the African Wildlife Forensic Network. In this presentation, I'm going to tell you a bit about how we started and where we are today. The African Wildlife Forensic Network brings together practitioners from the fields of crime scene investigation and wildlife forensic laboratory analysis. These forensic experts can interact with each other to exchange information and enhance the use of wildlife forensics in Africa. The network was launched in Gaborone, Botswana in May 2016 as part of an initiative led by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime and the British NGO Trace Wildlife Forensic Network. Since then, we have held annual meetings in different parts of the world. The UK and the Netherlands in 2017, South Africa in 2018, and Zambia in 2019. Today, the network is supported by multiple agencies, has a dedicated full-time coordinator, and operates under agreed terms of reference. We've been experiencing year-on-year growth in our membership. We are seeing more collaborations between the participants, and we are starting to see more casework supported by the use of wildlife forensics in Africa. This open session marks the final day of the 2020 meeting being held online this year. It is the 5th annual meeting of the African Wildlife Forensic Network, and over the past 3 days, we have heard from over 55 representatives from 15 African countries. The vision of the network is that wildlife law enforcement agencies across Africa have access to appropriate wildlife forensic science and wildlife crime scene services to support criminal investigations. Our mission is to develop and facilitate an active network of wildlife forensic stakeholders
and support access to forensic science and crime scene services across the African continent. To achieve our mission, we have established 7 key objectives covering networking, facilitation, awareness and support for new technologies, shared resources, and the harmonization of methodologies. Progress has been made in various fields in our activities, and I'm going to highlight some of this progress. In the field of wildlife crime scene investigation, the African Wildlife Forensic Network's Wildlife Crime Scene Guide for First Responders has been published with support from the UNODC, the European Commission, and the government of France. The AWFN has also developed a training manual based on the contents of the guide. In addition, the Wildlife Crime Scene Investigation Group of the network has an ongoing focus on the development of minimum standards that should be achieved by all personnel trained to work on a wildlife crime scene. In the field of wildlife laboratory analysis, TRACE has conducted a country-by-country gap analysis in the SADC region on behalf of the network to maintain an up-to-date picture of wildlife laboratory analysis capacity and capabilities. A number of resources are being developed to support labs in achieving good practice. We have almost completed the production of an online DNA traceability tool for lions called the Lion Localizer. We have also started the design of a curriculum for wildlife forensic laboratory training. In terms of networking, our main networking activity is our annual AWFN meeting, where we bring together laboratory and crime scene practitioners working on wildlife law enforcement issues across Africa. We maintain close links with the wider wildlife forensic science community, in particular the Society for Wildlife Forensic Science. Our next meeting in 2021 will be a joint meeting with the Society. Alongside training visits, the African Wildlife Forensic Network works to enable the transfer of reference samples, reference data and protocols among wildlife forensic practitioners and work to develop common resources for the African wildlife forensics community. That brings me to the end of this introduction to the African Wildlife Forensic Network. If you have any question about our organization, please post them in the question and answer box. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I have the pleasure to moderate the first Q&A session now. So at the moment, I can't see any questions in the Q&A box. So the floor is yours. Please type your questions for Rob Ogden and Amon Biko into the Zoom Q&A box. They will both be available to answer your questions live. We may have time for 1 or 2 questions per session, so please try to keep your questions and answers short and sweet. The rest of the questions will hopefully be dealt with then at the end of this webinar. Thank you. So we have a first question here that is, how do countries, organizations join the African Wildlife Forensics Network? So Rob or Armand, can you please answer this question?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that one. So the network itself is really focused on practitioners. So the vast majority of our members are government agencies, either running laboratories or running crime scene investigation processes and operations. So if you have a mandate within your country to be involved in that, and it's not always governments, it can be other types of organization, we'll hear from some later, then definitely get in touch with Armand. So the email address I think will be available later, and we've got a website as well which you can contact us through. So it's very much in that regard. If you're an interested party, then we'd love to hear from you, but whether you can become a full member or not, we'll have to wait and see.
Thank you, Rob. So currently no other question. That means I think we can carry on. As mentioned before, there is some time at the end of the webinar to ask more questions, and also for the other presenters after each session. So I hand over to Armand now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephanie. This takes us to the second session. We will start with a presentation highlighting the use of forensic methods for casework in Malawi, followed by a presentation showing the work of a well-established forensic lab in Zimbabwe, and then a capacity building model from the Netherlands National Forensic Institute. Let us go to the first presentation. It is given by Mr. Brighton Kumchidwa, Director of National Parks and Wildlife in Malawi. The presentation will touch on the recently conducted and concluded court case in Malawi that saw a successful prosecution of an international organized crime syndicate, highlighting the use of wildlife forensics and the challenges still faced in the country. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Brighton Kumchidwa, Director of National Parks and Wildlife Malawi. I would like to share with you my presentation. Status of illegal wildlife trade in Malawi. Malawi for quite a long time has been a soft target for organized international crime syndicates. Malawi, for example, was a source and a transit country for illegal wildlife trade. Going to COP17 South Africa in 2016, Malawi was named a country of primary concern. Since then, major efforts have been taken to tackle illegal wildlife trade. For example, establishment of intelligence and investigations unit, amendment of wildlife law, training of wildlife officers in prosecution of wildlife cases, placement of wildlife officers at our points of entry and exit, but also establishment of interagency committee on combating wildlife crime, introduction of wildlife drug detection unit, but also a massive public awareness campaigns. At COP18, site is COP18 in Geneva, Malawi was declared no longer a country of primary concern. On the arrest of organized international crime syndicate, 12 suspects arrested in Lilongwe in 2019, which involved 10 Chinese and 2 Malawian nationals. They were found in possession of cut pieces and processed rhino horn, pangolin scales, worked elephant ivory, hippo teeth, firearm, but also assorted ammunition. The court outcome, the hearing of one suspect continues, where 11 suspects were convicted and found guilty of the offense laid against them. All 11 convicts given custodial sentence. The sentences ranged from 18 months to 132 months. The maximum sentence being for repeat offenders, 2 of them, who were arrested for a similar wildlife offense in 2017, but also the court has ordered immigration that upon completion of serving the sentence, the repeat offenders should be deported back home. Application of forensics on species identification, taking the particular case, DNA analysis on rhino horns conducted by an expert in the name of Dr. Cindy Harper, who developed and maintains rhino DNA index system in South Africa. Results showed that 5 rhinos were identified, 3 of them killed in Malawi, while 2 were from unknown destination. What have been the challenges in use of forensics? Lack of a wildlife forensic DNA lab in Malawi. As a result, samples were taken to South Africa for species identification. That led also into delayed hearing of the case, but also it is expensive on its own. Inadequate knowledge on crime scene investigations and evidence collection. What are the lessons and the future needs? Good practice for the future. Access to external forensic services, development of a national reference collection for research and forensics, e.g. biobank, for law enforcement agencies to work together in combating illegal wildlife trade. As for training needs, crime scene awareness and evidence collection, morphological species identification, but also expert report writing and court testimony, very critical. What have been benefits to Malawi from AWFN? A lab specialist from CVL, that is Center Veterinary Lab, and a crime scene specialist from DNPW in Malawi are active AWFN members since 2016. Malawi to benefit from future forensic capacity building activities and the AWFN resources, e.g. crime scene guidelines, crime scene guides. Unique opportunity for Malawi AWFN members to network and learn from other international forensic experts. Ladies and gentlemen, this marks the end of my presentation, and I thank you for your attention.
Thanks to Brighton for a very motivating presentation. It is clear that Malawi has made huge progress in its response to wildlife crime in recent years. Now we will hear from Jessica Dawson, Director of the Victoria Falls Wildlife Trust, who operates a laboratory in Zimbabwe. This lab has been in operation for many years now and has achieved a number of recent successes in supporting wildlife prosecutions.
Good day, everyone. My name is Jessica Dawson. I am the Executive Director with the Victoria Falls Wildlife Trust, and we are here today representing the organization to discuss our wildlife forensic capacity within Zimbabwe. The Victoria Falls Wildlife Trust was established in 2008, and as the name lends itself, we're based in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe, in the National Park and World Heritage Site. We work together with the Zimbabwe Republic Police and the Parks and Wildlife Management Authority on wildlife crime investigations. We currently have a pending MOU with both respective authorities within Zimbabwe to ensure that our casework will hold up in a court of law. Our lab and organization is an independent non-governmental organization. We're also registered as a charity in the United States and the United Kingdom. We are able to work with the police and the Wildlife Authority in Zimbabwe through chain of custody, which allows us to receive and analyze evidence in wildlife crime cases, and also to return that evidence using the same chain of custody. We then provide a written lab report to the police and Wildlife Authority that they can use in a court of law. Our forensic capacity has been developing over time, and at the present moment we have 2 laboratory technologists that are being trained on DNA forensics according to the SWIFT's guidelines and standards that are internationally recognized. We also have been working with our partners and collaborators to be able to train Parks Investigations and the Zimbabwe Republic Police on wildlife crime scene investigation techniques. We've been working together with the Wildlife Authority and the police on dealing with cyanide and toxin seizure identification and toxicology extractions. This is one area that's growing in Zimbabwe and continues to be one of the biggest priorities for our investigations. We also are in the process of working on a geographic origin of ivory project, in which we've been taking samples of elephant from throughout the country and being able to analyze those samples through their genetic sequences to look at variations of different populations in different areas. This is to assist us in the future so that if there are samples from elephant that are seized, we are able to then map back, if they're from Zimbabwe, where in Zimbabwe they may have originated from. Our involvement with the African Wildlife Forensics Network has been ongoing for more than 4 years. We have had the pleasure of networking with so many of the other labs that are involved, and we also have had the benefit of significant hands-on training here in Zimbabwe, as well as equipment that's been provided by Trace. When we have casework that needs sequencing, we work together with the University of Zambia for their lab services to provide that sequencing. This is primarily for species identification and geographic origin sequences. We were fortunate enough that last year in 2019 at the Denver Conference for Swifts, I was able to attend the training and networking conference on morphological identification. This allowed me to be able to interact with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as well as Swifts mentors that assist us when we have casework questions and when we're working on some of our investigations back here in Zimbabwe. We're also a beneficiary of USAID funding, and that we've been able to procure and utilize equipment for DNA amplification. This has also been a benefit to us in that we were able to be trained by the equipment manufacturer Thermo Fisher. We continue to provide wildlife crime scene investigation and train the trainer training. We were the beneficiary of this in Zambia in 2019, and then we took that one step further and were able to work with Trace, the NFI, and the African Wildlife Forensics Network to be able to train those 26 Zimbabwe investigators from the Wildlife Authority and the police. Our casework and prosecutions are ongoing. In terms of our species identification cases, we have been doing a number of DNA extractions and amplification over the last few years. At the present time, all of our 2020 cases are pending. They haven't gone to court yet because of COVID. But we have been successful in the past in identifying bushmeat. Our penalties are not currently known. However, with 3 cases in 2019, we were successful in identifying the bushmeat as kudu and providing reports that were utilized in court for prosecution. In August 2019, after I attended the morphological identification training in Denver, was successful in working with the Wildlife Authority and the police in a seizure of ivory of 2 different types, including elephant ivory and warthog ivory. When the court case was heard, the individuals involved each received a 9-year prison sentence. One of our major challenges in casework continues to be the malicious poisoning of wildlife, especially within Zimbabwe. However, this area is growing regionally. We don't have the equipment at this time to be able to do anything more than a field test for cyanide. So what we are able to do is to be able to do an extraction and send it off for toxin identification. We are not able to get a quantification at this time. It is a bit difficult then to link malicious poisoning cases to individuals, and penalties are not all that significant. At the present time, in 2020, we have 12 open cases, and we've sent 42 samples out of the country to a U.S. toxin lab for results on identification. One example of a case in which this has involved a number of different types of wildlife crime was in 2019. In Botswana, poachers shot 7 elephant. They then laced 3 of them with carbofuran. This resulted in the mortalities of more than 537 vultures, carcasses that were found. Vultures are primarily all endangered or critically endangered in this part of the world. That was a significant number of the population of vultures. Ivory was subsequently recovered in both Zimbabwe and Namibia. It's just an example of how wildlife crime is, of course, transboundary. Thank you all for your time and to listening to our presentation on our capacity here in Zimbabwe. We are very grateful for all the support that we've been given to develop our capacity this far, and to Trace and the African Wildlife Forensics Network for being able to provide us with this opportunity. We hope you will continue to help us in building a stronger lab and capacity to be able to be effective in combating wildlife crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, for your presentation. The final presentation in this session is from the Netherlands National Forensics Institute, NFI, and will showcase their capacity building activities in the fields of wildlife forensics in Africa. The two presenters are Marcel van Beest, team manager at NFI and forensic expert in crime scene investigation, and Irene Cooper, forensic scientist and team leader on non-human biological traces at NFI.
Wildlife crime is among the top serious crimes in the world. An approximate $17 billion per year is made from illegal harvesting and trafficking of animals and plants. In order to successfully investigate wildlife crime and allow for successful prosecution and dismantling of criminal networks, every ranger in the field needs to understand the value of forensic evidence, how it can be protected from contamination and destruction, and how it can be used to great effect in the court of law.
My name is Irene Kuiper. I'm a forensic expert working at the Netherlands Forensic Institute, and my area of expertise is the analysis of non-human biological traces, including wildlife.
Hello everyone, my name is Marcel van Beest and I work at the NFI. My area of expertise is crime scene investigations. The Netherlands Forensic Institute. Our mission statement is aimed at the truth, guided by science for a safer society. The NFI is one of the world's leading forensic laboratories with expertise in more than 30 forensic research areas. With over 500 professionals, the NFI is one of the world's largest labs in the world. This lab is purpose-built and state-of-the-art here in our capital at The Hague. Provides multidisciplinary forensic services to a very wide range of national and international clients. We are active from the crime scene to the lab and then in courtroom defending or explaining our reports. The NFI is committed to develop the expertise of all professionals who contribute to the criminal justice system from scene of crimes to the courtroom. We provide our services to a very wide range of national and international clients, ranging from government institutions to IGOs and NGOs.
The NFI has a strong focus on quality. We have two types of accreditation, the ISO 17020 and the ISO 17025. Although all our examinations are validated, so to show that they are fit for purpose, some of our examinations are also specially accredited under these two norms. The crime scene investigation is accredited under 17020, and the analysis of non-human biological traces, including wildlife samples, is accredited under the 17025. The NFI also shares its knowledge on the quality systems with international partners, for example in the European Network of Forensic Science Institutes, but also with various other international forensic institutes. So we advise our colleagues how they, for example, can start building a quality assurance system and also to work according to these standards. In the past, the NFI trained over 500 professionals from 7 different African countries together with our partners, TRACE, Lead Rangers, UNODC. And the topics for training vary from forensic awareness, first responder conduct, sampling, wildlife crime scene investigation and wildlife sample analysis. Before we start a training program, we always will make a gap analysis to finally come up with a custom-made program which fits all the stakeholders. We also support other programs, and we're also involved in these programs from Interpol, IUCN, European Union and United Nations.
We are proud that we were able to create and write and publish UNODC Wildlife CSI Guide for First Responders with input from different forensic professionals from all over the world. Besides that publication, we've also been involved in developing a standard operating procedure on the sampling of poison arrows, which is a big problem in some African countries.
At a poaching scene or in the possession of an individual, there is a chance of finding poisoned arrowheads or packages of fresh, unused poison. After sampling, the type of poison can be chemically analysed and identified for the purpose of the criminal investigation. The sampling of toxic materials is performed by two people, a so-called clean man and a dirty man.
It's an important task for the NFI to help developing and writing best practice manuals and standard operation procedures, like we also do for the European Network of Forensic Science Institutes, in which we, for instance, wrote the best practice manual for soil comparisons and for molecular methods.
It is of utmost importance that the person who discovers the scene knows how to conduct themselves on the scene, but also clearly understands what not to do. The first responder must immediately report the finding to their supervisor, highlighting the condition or age of the carcass, the species, sex, and age of the animals. The coordinates of the scene should be recorded. Following the necessary precautions and procedures while entering the scene, a photograph of the carcass should be taken if possible.
The NFI has been involved with the African Wildlife Forensic Network from the beginning and will keep on supporting the network and its programs by providing advice, training and by developing content. Currently, the NFI is advising foreign authorities on necessary steps to improve impact in investigating wildlife crime and institutionalizing training. Main topics are wildlife sample analysis, first responder conduct, and crime scene investigations.
Thank you, Irene and Marcel, for your presentation.
Okay, hey everyone. So it's time again for questions. I can see we have already quite one or two questions associated to the second slot of presentations. So the one question would be from Birgit Kötting to Jessica Dawson from Zimbabwe on have you had water poisoned and how do you neutralize it to prevent further death? Jessica, may you please switch on your microphone and maybe your video if possible to answer this question?
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we have had water poisoned, usually not a major water source, mostly seasonal pans quite far away. And in the case, it's mostly been cyanide. And in that case, cyanide depends on how long it's been in the environment, but it generally gets absorbed by the atmosphere relatively quickly. We do recommend that it's neutralized. It's not our mandate. It's the mandate of the Wildlife Authority and the Environmental Management Authority. and they can utilize it if it's water using hydrochloric acid, and sometimes I think they also might use copper sulfate. But for the most part, if it's a small water body and people are present doing investigation, they generally post some rangers on it and make sure it is it's absorbed into the atmosphere.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. So we have another question for you again, Jess. Please stay online. In Malawi, it's a question from Cynthia Kavu. In Malawi, is the dog unit with the police or with wildlife authority? Obviously that you can't answer, but in Zimbabwe, do the lab technicians also go to court to give oral testimony apart from the written expert reports?
At this time, they're happy with our laboratory report or affidavits that are signed and stamped by the police. We haven't had to go to court yet with our laboratory technicians, but they have had the benefit at the last African Wildlife Forensics meeting of having some training on court testimony.
Okay, thank you very much, Jess. So I think the other questions we have to deal with at the end of the webinar. So I think we need to continue with the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephanie. Ladies and gentlemen, this takes us to the third session of this webinar, and we will hear from Tanzania and South Africa, followed by a video about a lion traceability database and tool called Lion Localizer, which has been developed by the network. Firstly, Dr. Fidelis Segumba, Manager of Forensic Science and Human DNA at the Government Chemist Laboratory Authority in Tanzania, will tell us about the work of the GCLA and will highlight some of the challenges of an early stage wildlife forensic laboratory.
Hello, good morning. My name is Fidelis Segumba, and I'm coming from Tanzania, and I'm working at an institution called Government Chemist Laboratory Authority, GCLA. This is an institution responsible for laboratory analysis as a way to give services to the public and also advice to the government on some of the analysis that are performed, and also regulatory issues. Government Chemist Laboratory Authority has the Act. There is the Act that stipulates what are the mandates of GCLA and what are the responsibilities, functions, and how are they supposed to be handled. This Act is giving us the mandate to do or perform laboratory analysis of forensic science issues or DNA services. By having this GCLA Act now, and also by having these challenges of being given the samples from wildlife species, because there's not any other lab that is doing forensic analysis as well as giving expert opinion at the court. So we have been receiving samples from institutions, from the police, as well as from the Ministry of Tourism and Natural Resources, that we have to do analysis of wildlife species. So from there, that is when we had a move on how we can establish this laboratory. Now, with the help of TRES, we are now having a mini lab to cover the analysis from extraction up to PCR and as well as to detection. Now, with the help of TRES, we have got training of our laboratory analysts, almost 13 laboratory analysts who are now working as forensic human DNA lab analysts. They have been trained, and from there we have been receiving samples, more samples we have been receiving, and we have been trying to do them, and almost 80 samples which covers different type of species and as well as different parts of the species. This include the ivory samples, the bone samples, the fats, the fecal matters from these species. All of these have been done in this small lab, but we still have challenges. And the most challenges we are facing is from the burnt tusk and the burnt bones, as well as the fats. Another challenge is on how to represent, how to report the analysis to the court, because we are having different types of species that we have to analyze. But what are the basics on how to report this? Another thing is that we have a challenge of a space, because we are up to this moment we are expecting to have more samples to be analyzed. So up to this moment, we say we are in a position that is not very bad, because we can do this analysis from the lab, but we need to improve ourselves to this to counteract these challenges that we are having now. Apart from that, we are glad that we get this chance to participate in African Wildlife Forensic Network, because this is always giving us a chance to learn more. This year, we were expecting also to have a meeting in our country, but we feel very sorry because of this coronavirus, but thankful enough that we have this chance to share what we have through the online system. But apart from that, I would like to speak more, but the time is limiting us, and I will say thank you for everything. Thank you, TRESS people. We need to say thank you also to those coordinators of African Wildlife Forensic Network meeting, and also thank you every other members, and we hope to get more from this meeting of African Wildlife Forensic Network. Thank you. You are all welcome to Tanzania. Still, we would like you to come and visit our place and see how we move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Fidelis, for your presentation.
This is a joint presentation given by 3 members of the network. It uses a typical case of a poached African elephant in Kruger National Park to highlight wildlife crime scene management and wildlife forensic laboratory analysis good practice, and to provide advice on expert witness testimony in court. The presenters are Mr. Frick Rousseau, Manager of Internal Crime Investigation from the South African National Parks, Professor Antoinette Kotze, Director of Foundational Research and Services from the South African National Biodiversity Institute, and Mr. Kevin Pretorius, ex-Senior Public Prosecutor, who is currently a specialist criminal and environmental lawyer practicing out of Durban, South Africa.
My name is Frick Rousseau, and I'm going to give you a very brief presentation on crime scene management. First of all, it's important to remember the admissibility of your evidence is very important in court. The court must be sure that the evidence that you produce is authentic. In other words, make sure that the evidence that you submit is submitted in its original format. Before you do anything else, before you cordon it off, it's important that you take a photograph of your undisturbed scene. In other words, a scene that hasn't been disturbed or entered by anybody else. So allow your photographer to take a photograph, or yourself, doesn't matter who the photographer is, of your undisturbed scene. Next, you can cordon off the scene. You can use barrier tape or rope Doesn't matter if you don't have any of the latter, then you can also use toilet paper that you attach to twigs and branches in order to indicate the perimeter of your scene. Next, you should search your scene and mark all the evidence you find. Use as many people as you can. Doesn't matter what search type you use, a block search, a spiral, or in lanes, but search it thoroughly and make sure that you locate and mark each and every piece of evidence. Once you've located your evidence, you need to photograph it. Evidence can be anything from footprints, items with DNA on it, fingerprints, a bullet, a spent cartridge casing. Mark it properly with evidence markers. If you do not have fancy ID tins, you can use cups that you mark, anything that you can use to mark your evidence with. Once you've located it, you need to pack it and seal it in evidence bags. It's proper to photograph your evidence with an evidence marker next to your evidence bag, and also once you've sealed it in the evidence bag, so that the unique number of your evidence bag is visible. Next, we go to the sampling for DNA profiling. That's sampling of your animal carcass. We're dealing here with a 10-day-old elephant carcass. The only samples available was skin. You can see the investigator here sampling some skin and placing it after cut off with a knife. You can use the same knife on the same animal. Once you move to another animal, you need to decontaminate your equipment and then place it in a container. Investigator samples here sinew, which is attached to bone. Sinew is dry, but it can be sampled, and again it's placed into a container. Lastly, we sampled some flat bone or rib. So any other evidence that was available or anything else that was to be sampled, it's placed in a bag. It's a little big for a plastic container. And there you can see the 3 pieces of samples taken, marked A, B and C, and now we're going to place it in a proper evidence bag with a unique serial number, and it gets sealed and photographed right there on the scene. And in the end, not only your photographs is a recording, you need to record everything on paper. In other words, in a statement, you need to compile a crime scene report and also a sketch plan. Remember, these are your original notes which you've taken on the scene, and it is admissible in court. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Antoinette Kotze. I'm from the South African National Biodiversity Institute, Pretoria, South Africa. I'm going to take you through the process of non-human DNA forensic analysis, and where exhibits were collected from 2 crime scenes, one from Kruger and the other one from the OR Tambo International Airport. We worked through the South African Police Services and the Forensic Science Laboratory, and where the investigator requested us, first of all, to do a species identification of all exhibits, as well as, secondly, to do a match of these exhibits with a tusk that was at a later stage confiscated at the OR Tambo International Airport. We have dedicated laboratories, which is not shared with researchers or students. We also have state-of-the-art equipment, which is calibrated and serviced. We have a well-trained staff, trained in ethics and chain of custody evidence handling, as well as expert witness testimony, and also how to prepare a case file. It is always important to adhere to international standards, and in particular we follow the recommendations of the International Society for Forensic Genetics and the Society for Wildlife Forensic Science. The basis of everything for the entire analysis is to follow a laboratory information management system where every step is validated and also chain of custody is followed. We make use of subsampling of all exhibits to be analyzed. In the case of the tusk, we generated the power, and then we do DNA extraction following the manufacturer's protocol. We then do PCR, add the markers, do sequencing, and then for the first time something is visible, which are the trace files. And from the trace files, we then generate the DNA profiles, which are now our results. And in this case, the results were found to be, first of all, All exhibits to be Loxodonta africana with 100% confidence. We've also found, using our database, that it was from Kruger. We confirmed that. And also, when matching the exhibits to the tusk found at the airport, we found 100% match. This then goes into a report, which for us is a 212 statement. And this then goes into the docket of the investigator, and this docket is then handed over to the prosecutor.
Hi, my name is Kevin Pretorius. I'm a lawyer in private practice in Durban in South Africa, and I have over 30 years of litigation experience in the various criminal courts. As ex-senior prosecutor, I've prosecuted in many illegal wildlife cases and have dedicated my private practice to assisting private and public agencies in combating illegal wildlife crime and illegal wildlife trade. Now, today I'm going to give you some insight in your preparation as a witness for the prosecution in an illegal wildlife case. Now, Professor Kotze and Mr. Rousseau have given you some insight already into the scenario of an African elephant that has been poached, and you are now going to be testifying either about what you saw or heard, what you did, and also possibly the conclusion as an expert witness in the forensic examination. A very important part of that is in you being a witness, you need to be able to testify and give justification for the evidence that you're giving. And in that way, your evidence has to be honest and accurate. The court is going to make a finding on this, and this is the bedrock of all testimony and evidence in court. And therefore, the prevention of contamination in the chain of custody or elsewhere needs to be uppermost. Court preparation. This is a very important part and is often underestimated. Understand the facts that you're giving. If you're an expert and have a court file or the investigator, go through your statements, go through the evidence that you're going to present. And if it's a report in the scientific expertise you're going to give, prepare on that. Know something about your laboratory's accreditation and the standards that you are using to come to this conclusion in your report. Consult with the prosecutor beforehand, because they might not know any of these processes or what you do. Take the prosecutor through your evidence carefully. Listen to his or her questions. They're going to be leading your evidence. They are your lawyer in court. Disclose to the prosecutor if there's some gray areas that you've seen in your evidence. Importantly, as we said, honesty is the only policy. You don't want to be found to be not credible in a criminal court. Before you've given your evidence in court, stay away from social media and making these kind of press releases or showing photos. Remember, all of this will be used by the defense in cross-examination. I can say from my side, thank you for what you do to protect our environment and the very hard work that everyone plays in trying to combat the scourge of illegal wildlife crime and illegal wildlife trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Frick, Antoinette, and Kevin for showing us how you respond to a wildlife crime case from the crime scene to the court. The next presentation is about the Lion Localizer tool. Now we will hear about it. It is a database to trace the geographic origin of lion parts in trade. This tool has been developed by the network, and Simon Gires will tell us more. It also highlights the advantages of having DNA lab facilities gradually being developed in each country.
We all know Africa is famous for its wildlife, But sadly, poaching for animal meat or animal parts which are deemed valuable is becoming an ever more lucrative and international illegal trade. And this is leading to a massively increased threat to the wildlife of this beautiful continent. Away from Africa, wildlife has been even more heavily exploited. The loss of predators in Asia is particularly noticeable in tigers, whose numbers have fallen from around 100,000 to a mere 3,000 to 4,000 in the last 100 years. As tiger numbers have diminished, there is increasing evidence that African lions are now being targeted to fill that void. Currently, there is limited understanding of where in Africa the lion body parts supplying this illegal market are coming from. Working with conservation scientists, we are using 10 years worth of currently existing genetic data to provide a tool for law enforcement investigators to develop intelligence regarding the origin of the animals found in the illegal lion trade. Every lion has a unique genetic code. However, sections of this genetic code will be shared by all the lions that originate from a similar region. This means that for any lion, we can locate the region that it comes from. Our database currently has over 400 individual lions with a known location. Similarities within the DNA of all these lions can be geographically clustered, and this will allow the geographic origin of body parts seized by law enforcement to be identified. The goal for this tool is to use it to gather intelligence regarding where lions are being targeted for the sale of their body parts. By identifying hotspots, intelligence can inform law enforcement, allowing them to set up operations to target poachers and individuals involved in illegal wildlife trade, leading to arrests and, with the appropriate evidence, convictions.
Thank you, Simon, for a wonderful presentation.
Okay, everybody. I'm trying to deal with questions for the presenters of this session number 3. So Fidelis Segumba from Tanzania, the Dream Team from South Africa, Antoinette, Frick, and Kevin, and Simon Jures from Trace. So let me look at the Q&A box here. So I see there is a question for Simon Jures from Trace. The question is from Maliki Wajomto. The development of national biobanks would be key to traceability. At which stage are SADC and other African countries in developing this tool? Simon, could you please answer this question?
I completely agree. The lion localizer is something that we're developing based on information that's out there from sort of academic circles. In terms of biobanks, it's not really a question that I would be able to answer, although possibly I could pass that across to Rob, who may have a better idea.
Nicely passed, Simon. Yeah, so good question, Maliki. We recognize this as an issue, and it's something that actually at the moment the VUCA Now program, which you're going to hear about in the next session, is looking to try and support, initially at least in countries such as Zambia and Malawi, where we've got plans for biobanks which would provide reference samples for forensic applications, but also national resources for genetic samples for just ongoing maintenance of biodiversity and biodiversity research in each country, with a number of different initiatives and global conventions like the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing. It's getting more and more important for countries to be able to manage their genetic resources in country, and biobanks are a really key part of that. So I can't answer on behalf of SADC, but certainly there are biobanking initiatives starting to take off, and in some ways replicate the work that SAMBI have already done at that in the South African National Biodiversity Institute. So things are starting to happen, but as with everything, it takes time.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Then we have another question to Kevin Pretorius from South Africa. And the question is from Simon Esisima. More explanation on how social media can affect the judgment of a case. Kevin, can you please answer this question?
Sure. Thank you, Simon. We've picked up that a live case where no evidence has been given yet in any testimony, the defense often now get access to your video material or your pictures that you've put up on social media, or that things that you're doing, or explanations. And through that, we are actually then able to use that in cross-examination, because there may be contradictions now in the way that you're presenting your evidence or your report. So there's nothing wrong with a media release through your communications office, or many agencies have these where they talk about the case and what's been done in terms of a very clinical and very without much detail. But sometimes people get a bit ahead of themselves, and that can cost us as prosecutors to have to dance around this kind of cross-examination. It makes it very difficult for a witness who might already be under pressure. So, rather keep your testimony and what you're finding to yourself until such time as you've given your evidence in court, and that the matter is then you don't want it to affect the trial in any way. That's really the reason we're talking about it, because unfortunately there has been these incidents internationally.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Kevin, for your answer here. So I think it's time to go on with the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Ladies and gentlemen, this takes us to the last session of this webinar. In this session, we will have two stakeholder examples from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, and the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. These two presentations will be followed by the closing remarks. So let's go to the first presentation of the session. The first presentation comes from the UNODC co-founder of the network. UNODC has over 40 years of experience in forensic capacity building. Today, Mr. George Rios, Chief of the UNODC Global Program for Combating Wildlife and Forest Crimes, will tell us about two of the newest tools developed to support the wildlife forensics community in Africa.
Good afternoon, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really pleased to be here today to provide a few words at this virtual meeting of the African Wildlife Forensics Network. UNODC has a very long history of working with countries to build their laboratory and their law enforcement capacity. As we've seen time and time again, the value of fostering cooperation between countries, between experts, bringing scientists and law enforcement together to see how and what scientific methods can be used to support law enforcement to address wildlife criminality. The African Wildlife Forensics Network is a great example of what can be done when we bring together these two communities. The network was established under a project implemented by the UN Office on Drugs and Crime and TRACE about 5 years ago. And as some of you may know and have already heard, the network has come a long way since then. Last year, UNODC worked with many of the experts here and many other partners of the network to produce the Wildlife Crime Scene Guide for First Responders. And I'd like to take this opportunity to profoundly thank the EU and France for providing the generous support to make this happen. The tool you see on the screen describes the minimum standards and the guidelines for wildlife crime scene management. Since it's been published, we've received 18 requests from different countries for copies of the guide. The guide's also been translated into French, and we hope that the guide will serve first responders in French-speaking African countries. There's a training manual that has also been produced, and next month, experts from TRACE and the Netherlands Forensics Institute will pilot a train-the-trainer program at the Mweka Wildlife College in Tanzania. Mweka staff will then deliver this training to local rangers. It is important for the network that instead of providing one-off trainings, that we build a train-the-trainer program and that this be institutionalized. This is the key to sustainability, as well as to the standardization of CSI skills and competencies for wildlife crime first responders across Africa, and we plan to engage with more training facilities in the future. I also wanted to use this opportunity to mention a new project that TRACE and UNODC will be implementing, which may be of interest. We put together a portable enforcement lab for testing seizures. With this portable lab, we can provide analysis services to African countries which lack local access to wildlife DNA forensic facilities. You'll see from the photograph on the left that all the necessary equipment fits into a small number of suitcases, which can then be easily transported with trained staff to the requesting country. I won't go into much detail here, but essentially the seizures can be sampled, the DNA extracted using the portable lab equipment, then couried to a lab in Germany via a chain of custody control process. The lab conducts the DNA sequencing, and the results are made available immediately to the in-country team for analysis, report writing, and hopefully for use in court. It's a good option for those who require a quick turnaround, but for many reasons don't have the ability to conduct DNA analysis in their own country. The network is really a fantastic example of international, multi-organizational, and multidisciplinary cooperation. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the members, as well as all the partners and the donors, for their work in making this such a success. The scientific and the enforcement communities need to cooperate and to collaborate. They need to understand each other's way of working. Only by doing this can we improve the ability of forensic science to support law enforcement and to make a collective difference in tackling wildlife trafficking. You can count on UNODC for support, and I'd like to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jorge, for your presentation and for UNODC's support to the network. The next presentation is from USAID and will showcase their support and capacity building efforts in the field of forensics in Africa. The presenter is Dr. Simon Muntali, Chief Technical Advisor of USAID VUCA-NOW program.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Simon Muntali. I am Chief Technical Advisor to the USAID VUCA-NOW Combating Wildlife Crime activity. VUCA-NOW is a learning activity of the USAID Southern Africa Combating Wildlife Crime portfolio. The goal of this portfolio is to significantly reduce wildlife crime in Southern Africa. VUCA-NOW under this portfolio is implemented under two objectives. The first objective is to catalyze learning and sharing of best practice lessons for improved results to combating wildlife crime. The second objective is to increase collaborative action to reduce wildlife crime in transboundary landscapes, as well as areas falling between these landscapes in Southern Africa. VUCA-NOW works with multiple partners. These include consortium partners, TRACE, focus on forensics capacity building, Collaborate Up, focus on convening special platforms for reflection, action, and collaboration in combating wildlife crime. In addition to consortium partners, we work with landscape partners who include IFO in the Malawi-Zambia Transfrontier Conservation Area, WFUS in the Kaza Landscape, Kavango Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, WWF South Africa and the WWF South Africa, Lowveld Rhino Trust, and Sustainable Agriculture Technologies in the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Area. In a furthermore, we work with SADC, in particular the food, agriculture, and natural resources sector, and the Organ for Peace and Security and Politics. Lastly, we work with governments in 8 SADC member states. These include Angola, Botswana, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. VUCA now support to forensics and African Forensic Network include developing common resources, such as standardized crime scene management procedures, the FORCET DNA database, and others. We also support convening of the African Forensic Network meetings, which are an important platform for sharing knowledge and learning. We also support forensic lab capacity building in terms of provision of equipment and training. And overall, we support improved impact in terms of evidence quality that leads to winning of wildlife client cases. Moving forward into the financial year 2021-2022, the forensic support will include determining forensic needs in the Lusophone countries, Angola and Mozambique, exploring the possibility of building wildlife forensic capacity in Eswatini, and supporting biobank development in Malawi and Zambia. Forensic science, as we all know, is integral to the combating wildlife crime efforts in Southern Africa. The contribution that the African Forensic Network is making should be sustained beyond short-term donor support. Members of the African Forensic Network should therefore urgently start debating and identifying mechanisms for long-term sustainability of the network. VUCA now has initiated the process of developing sustainability mechanism for combating wildlife crime in Southern Africa through national and transboundary law enforcement and anti-poaching task forces. We will be engaging with our consortium partner TRACE to ensure that forensic science continues to play its critical role in combating illegal wildlife trade. VUCA now looks forward to learning from all of you on how the African Forensic Network can be sustained beyond short-term donor support. I thank all of you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon, for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the final presentation of the day. Mr. Chiza Manda is the GIZ Technical Advisor for SADC in charge of the law enforcement and anti-poaching strategy. Mr. Manda is a long-term member of the African Wildlife Forensic Network. He is also a previous beneficiary of the forensic capacity building activities during his former role as the Malawian Deputy Director of the Department of National Parks and Wildlife. During his professional career, he has gained a very good overview of the existing capacity and needs of the wildlife law enforcement community in the SADC region. Today, Mr. Manda will review this webinar and present the way forward for the network.
Thank you, Chair, for the introduction. I really feel honored to make this wrap-up presentation. But before I do that, let me thank the audience for staying with us during this open session today. By way of wrap-up, the African Wildlife Forensic Network wanted to introduce to stakeholders what wildlife crime scene investigation is, also what wildlife forensic analysis is, but also introduce the African Wildlife Forensic Network to stakeholders, stakeholders here. But we've also had the privilege to hear from our national stakeholders on their work, but also learned a lot from the wider combating wildlife community operating across the landscape in this part in Africa. Yeah, we really, as you all see, that wildlife forensic or forensic science is a multi-agency undertaking. Though this looks like a challenge, but it brings along a lot of opportunities, considering the expertise, the experiences, and the various skills. So if you look at this slide, we've tried to capture the stakeholders who are engaged, and if you can recognize yourself here, then just know that you really have a role to play in wildlife forensic science. I hope it's inclusive enough, but you are all, even if you are not covered here, we really have a role to play. Where do we go beyond 2020? So we had a big vision which we wanted to achieve, that wildlife agencies have access to appropriate science and crime scene services in wildlife criminal investigations, which is a big ambition, and we've tried to pursue it. But there's still plenty to do. If you look at the map, you have the yellow areas on the African map where the network has reached out, but there's still lots of gaps. There's also only capacity imaging in some areas. Law enforcement, as usual, is struggling, and obviously new threats are emerging. What more with the COVID-19 pandemic? So really, we have an issue to say, how do we fill the gaps, and how do we have real impact on wildlife law enforcement in the different landscapes in different areas? So the future plans for the network still strive to achieve the objectives, deliver the work plan. So really the spirit goes on, the spirit still lives to achieve the objectives. Then, as you have seen the gaps on the maps, geographic expansion, especially in the Francophone and Lusophone Africa, we need to pursue that. Then expanding technical and scientific expertise is also a big priority. The network itself has to increase visibility, which means engaging more broadly. Have to keep on developing and maintaining learning and sharing, and have to work towards a sustainable and Africa-based organizational model. So as you can see that really there's still much to do. Haven't gone this far, but we still have work to do. So really would like to invite you to contribute, whether through expertise, financial or otherwise, in this noble undertaking. And let me thank you very much for your attention, and I hand you over to the chair for the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiza, for a good concluding presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of our presentations, and it is time to take some more questions. The final Q&A session will be chaired by Rob Ogden of TRACE and moderated by Sainid Brophy of UNODC. I would like to thank you all for your time and support. Over to you, Rob.
Many thanks, Armand, and many thanks to all of our presenters today. It's been a really good session. I'm hopefully going to be given questions by Sinead, who's hopefully looking through the Q&A at the moment. I'd just like to say we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left for the main session. If people are still interested in receiving answers to their questions, feel free to stay on afterwards. We'll extend it a little bit in terms of the panelist availability. And if we don't get to everyone's questions orally, we'll definitely answer them by text. Okay, Sinead.
Thanks, Rob. I don't see any questions yet to the last panelists, to you, Nodisi, Vukana, or to Chiza. So maybe we go back up while those questions are coming in. This question is to Brighton of Malawi. Is the dog unit with police or the Wildlife Authority?
Hello. Yeah, the dog unit is housed in Malawi Police Service, but it's a joint venture between DNPW and Malawi Police Service.
Okay, thank you, Brighton.
There's a question, Sinead, I know that came in from Stephen Donovan before the session, which might be quite nice to address.
Sure. Any update on ready access to local lab analytic capability for the identification of toxic pesticides used to kill wildlife? Who's that directed to, Rob?
Well, I think Jess might be able to comment on it. Stephen was interested in the availability of various forms of mass spec to diagnose different toxins. And Jess, you're probably the person with the most experience of how easy that is or not to do at the moment. Jess, you're muted.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. We actually engaged with Stephen in his lab in the US to send our toxin extractions to. We're not aware of another lab that can do quantification nearby. And just to be clear right now with COVID and shipping, it has been quite a big challenge. So at this time, we continue to engage with Stephen. I believe perhaps you can comment on any development in this area within the network.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. I think certainly compared to DNA infrastructure, there's a lot less available in a lot of the range states we're working in for this type of chemical analysis. And I think, yeah, establishing these labs and making sure you've got the scientific infrastructure to support them is also challenging. So it's one of those areas where we're probably going to be reliant on international partners for the foreseeable future for a lot of countries, but it's a super important area of work to be able to address. Okay, Sinead.
Okay, while we have Jessica there are a couple more questions for you. Do the lab technicians also go to court to give oral testimony apart from the written expert report?
Yeah, at this time, we haven't had our lab technicians called into court, but we were fortunate to benefit from the AWFN training last year at the meeting on court testimony.
Thank you, Jessica. This question is for Irene and Marcel. What kind of trainings are given by the NFI in the short or long term, and what's the procedure for someone who's interested?
Maybe I can answer this one. Training will be both ways, either lab analysis, species ID and all that, and on non-human biological traces, or help with training in wildlife crime scene investigation. Can be for first responders, but also for a what we call a full-blown crime scene investigators course. Procedure is actually through the network. And we will then coordinate and see what the possibilities are on short-term or even long-term with the network, so with Trace, UNODC. And mainly, we focus on longer-term relationships with our partners also. We do not really believe in a short course and then leaving. We believe in something that's more sustainable. And that's why I think the network is important to also coordinate that in a way.
Thanks, Marcel. Okay, Sinead, there's a couple of questions coming through on the PELT system, I think.
Yes, in the chat box. We have one from Jorge Rios of UNODC. He says, using forensics for investigation and prosecution is the objective. What, in the opinion of both the scientists and the national government authorities, are the main challenges that prevent forensics from being successfully used? Is it the laws? Is it bureaucracy? Is it low capacity, or what?
Anyone want to take a stab at that? I have an opinion, but it would be great to hear maybe from some of the range states on the biggest current limitations to the use of forensics. Why has it been particularly challenging in some places? I'm not sure who we still have with us, whether Fidelis or Brighton might be like to address that one.
Well, I think for the case of Malawi, I should think it is largely a problem of capacity. Yeah. So that is a very much limiting factor. Yeah.
And I think when it comes to capacity building, from my experience, the real limitations are this requirement to lift sort of everything off the ground simultaneously. So from crime scene to courtroom, there are a lot of different actors that we have to try and join up, often interagency, and making communication flows, and making sure that everybody is playing their part. And some of those parts might be really small, but they're still really vital to the successful use of this type of evidence. So just training in the lab or just training on the crime scene is not enough. So it's the integration of all these things and making sure that they work in concert, which is probably the biggest challenge. It's not really the technical stuff. It's not super science. It's making sure the system works. Sinead.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Yes, there's a question about PELT, the Portable Enforcement Lab. From Ben at CITES, at what scale are these being produced and how accessible are they currently to countries? How is distribution conducted?
All right, that sounds like one for me again, probably. So, and I think there was another question just below that also relating to PELTs and its use in the field from Himanshu. So I'll take both of those. So PELTs is essentially a set of portable lab equipment. So it's based in one country. There's a setup in Southeast Asia. There's a setup being developed in Africa. And the idea is that it can be flown in with a couple of members of staff to then work not in the field, but at a designated facility where there is evidence to be analyzed. So that might be a Department of National Parks base or a customs headquarters or something like that. And it allows the lab work to be done under very tightly controlled conditions, very, very quickly in a very flexible way. The actual work, it does involve the use of local staff, because the local staff are usually those who are going to have to testify. It can be overseen by the PELT staff who come in and the teams who can provide that information. So it's not entirely remote. It very much involves working with stakeholders on the ground. But the idea is that you don't have to have the infrastructure and capacity permanently in that country. So after a week or 2 weeks, then everyone packs up the things back into the suitcases and ships it back off. So in Africa, it's being based out of Uganda at the present. And as I say, there's one in Southeast Asia as well. So it's not actually for use in the field. And there is only one unit, but it covers obviously a very broad reach. In this case, yeah, the whole of Africa, but it's still, it's been used, I think, once so far within Uganda and then once in Ethiopia in February. So it's early days still.
Yes, I think deployment has also been hampered by the pandemic generally. So yeah, the setup in Uganda has taken a little bit longer to get off its feet. So we're providing support via Trace remotely to many countries. I see quite a few questions for Simon about the Lion localizer. Simon, you probably read them. Can it be done to a small scale? Can anyone add data to the online tool? Another question about the scale. What sort of scale are the regions that you can assign lions using DNA?
So I guess addressing the can anyone submit samples first, the answer will be yes. At the moment, we're still kind of fixing the back end and getting everything running. But the idea is that anyone that can generate DNA samples or any labs that have the capability of generating DNA, and we're using quite simple mitochondrial sequences, they will be able to upload sequences either to sit in the background as a reference or to look at casework and to help with intelligence. That should hopefully be up relatively soon. In terms of the scale, it's not a simple question to answer. It really depends on where the lion comes from. If the bones that you have happen to have come from a region that has still got quite high diversity, lots of lions around, so I'm thinking the Kaza region, and also has had lots of lions previously sampled, so we have genetic records in the background, then we can do it to a relatively small scale. Somewhere that has much lower diversity of lions left existing, so maybe West Africa, and also we don't have many samples in our database, it's much harder to do to a very fine scale, but we can still target to a wide region. The more samples that we get in the background, so the more people that are able to submit, be that caseworkers or be that research biologists, the more accurate we will be able to make the tool. And eventually we hope to upscale it to using more genome-wide technologies, which will give us much more resolution.
Okay, and a final question for you, Simon. Is there a software base for the Lion localizer that can be extended for other African species? Also, does it use mitochondrial or nuclear data or both?
Okay, so at the moment it's using mitochondrial, so we're using cytochrome B in the control region, and like I say, hopefully we'll try and expand that into more diverse regions. In terms of is there a software basis, we are actually using a Loxodonta localizer, so an elephant version of it, to build the lion localizer. So yes, there is a background, but it still needs a bit of building. I'm not involved in the computer system at the back, but yes, in essence, it could be upscaled to other species. It would take time, but yes.
Thanks, Simon. We've had two questions about the availability of presentations after the session. So I know that this is being recorded and it will be available on YouTube. We'll send the link around to everyone who's registered. Okay, we have another question for Simon, but maybe we'll give a chance to someone else first. In Africa, many parks and wildlife in general is at the hands of governments who usually do not have capacity to establish labs and hire experts. How is the network working on more collaborative approaches that are sustainable in nature to help African governments? Who's taking that one?
I can comment a little. So there are a number of number of issues within that question, I guess. One of them is that not every country in Africa has forensic services at all. So some countries have no forensic laboratory capacity for any kind of wildlife or any kind of criminal investigation, whether it's wildlife or human victim. And in cases where arguably forensic capacity is going to be quite a long way off, then there are a number of solutions, and we've heard about a few of them today. One is the ability to send casework to neighboring countries for analysis. And there was a good example of that with a presentation from Malawi, where they got analysis done in South Africa on the rhinos. Another is to use the PELT system, where you don't have to have capacity in country because it can be flown in to address particular casework events. And then there is the actual opportunity to build labs. And a few of the labs that we've heard from today have been established really only in the last 3 or 4 years, and they don't actually have to cost that much money. They just need to be managed correctly. That's the key thing down the line. And so there is quite a lot of donor interest and donor support at the moment for developing laboratory capacity. But the one thing that we've learned from doing this is that there's no kind of one-size-fits-all solution. So it really does need to be judged on a country-by-country basis. Usually the right solution is to work with national government scientific agencies, but that's not always the case. Usually you need to involve Department of National Parks and Wildlife, but that's not always the case. So generally speaking, we need to go in and help find a solution which is the thing that the government in that country needs most of all, and what will work realistically.
Thanks, Rob. Another question from Ben of the Society Secretariat. Are there any active outreach to countries in Africa that are not yet part of the network with the aim of further expanding it? Also, if additional countries wish to join, are there financial or resource implications that need to be met? And if so, are resources available to support countries in meeting these if needed? I think Chiza touched on some of these issues. Maybe Armand or Rob have more to add. Armand. You're muted, Armand.
Oh, thank you, Sinead. Can you please just repeat the question for me? I couldn't get it properly.
Is there active outreach to countries that aren't involved in the network? And if we're going to have new countries joining, are there financial resource implications for that?
At the moment, yes, there are many countries that are not active in the network. And in terms of joining the network, at the moment, there are no real financial implications other than the fact that we would like to have people who are really willing to engage in the network and to participate, to contribute something to the network. And in so doing, what will happen is that we will be able to sort of know what are their capacity and capability in the field of wildlife forensics and what is needed, and together see if it is possible to actually start building that capacity in the countries. So in terms of financial implication, they aren't at the moment to be member of the network.
Yeah, maybe I can just add slightly. So we are trying to expand, particularly into Francophone West Africa, where we recognize there's a real need. We've got colleagues here from Senegal, and also I think from Cameroon, and certainly from Gabon. But we definitely need to open up more into that kind of area, but it also depends on what's happening on the ground. So there's a kind of a lag before members become, I guess, appropriate to join the forensic network is identifying who's there and who's got the mandate to do the work. When it comes to money, obviously money is always good, but in terms of membership of the network, what we really only require at the moment is the ability to bring people together once a year. Obviously, this has been a virtual get-together, and I think that's fine for this year, but we try and bring everyone together face-to-face on an annual basis. So that as the network grows, that becomes more and more of a financial burden, because we we try as hard as we can to make sure that no one has to pay to come to the meetings at an individual or institutional level. So we're very keen for support at that level, and I guess ongoing over the next sort of 3 to 5 years, there'll be discussions about continuity because we'll run out of US aid funding. But so right now it's relatively light touch in terms of financial resources, but we are definitely trying to expand.
Okay, we have another 2 questions for Jessica. One on bushmeat analysis. Were you able to analyze the roasted bushmeat, and which methods for DNA extraction work best for you?
Yeah, in most of our cases, the bushmeat we receive is dried, and we just use a QIAGEN extraction kit and are able to do species identification. For cases that had roasted meat, if you can cut into it to try and get a sample that is a bit more fresh, those also are yield a bit better DNA for that testing.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. And there's another question about trainings and how other local Zimbabweans are able to attend such trainings. I suppose this is also a question for the network more broadly.
Do they mean for first responders?
I think it's for the trainings that you've attended. How can others access such opportunities?
Well, it's mostly been in situ training in the lab, and then through the network, it's by invitation with the African Wildlife Forensics Network for the laboratory technical people that are involved, as well as for those that are involved with train the trainer training.
Thanks, Jessica. Do we have Armand's email address? Perhaps we'll include, or that he's been emailing people who've registered, so everyone can contact Armand if they have any questions about getting involved in the network or trainings, future trainings. We have a question that's to Armand. Is there any particular reason why lab personnel were not part of the investigations team sessions? Not sure which sessions that.
I suppose that question is probably related to the breakout sessions we had yesterday. And if that is the case in any way, then for yesterday, people were put in breakout rooms based on their field of interest, that we already had in advance. If you worked in the lab, we assumed that your field of interest will be laboratory analysis, and we sent you to the breakout that dealt with it. If you were a crime scene investigator, we assumed that that was your field of interest, and we sent you there. But if the question is not related to what happened yesterday, then I am not sure what sessions is referring to.
Maybe if that's, while that has been clarified, Sinead, there's a question from Gail Pedersen, who asked quite early on in the session.
Is there capacity being developed for private reserves and or local wildlife crime prevention associations to be trained on wildlife CSI? It's often anti-poaching units or reserve staff who will be first responders, so their knowledge of maintaining crime scene integrity and evidence chain of custody is critical.
Yeah, so thank you for that question, Gail. It's really relevant actually, because depending on which country you're based in, more or less of the wildlife management is done at a very local level or done by non-government actors. So in terms of the recipients of training, yes, I think we're increasingly recognizing that we need to be available, and training needs to be available to train lots of different stakeholders in this space. So anyone who's responsible for doing this. The tricky thing is the interface between, I guess, identifying a crime scene or recognizing something's happened and then having a mandate actually to act on that crime scene, and go into it and, you know, touch evidence and that kind of thing. Because if you find that that's happening and then you end up in court and someone says, well, you're not law enforcement agencies, you didn't have any mandate or any right to go in and interfere with evidence, then the whole thing can fall apart. So I think, yeah, we're aware that there's a key role of non-government actors in this, but it's quite difficult sometimes to exactly work out what the best solution is, because when it comes to forensic evidence, there are some real limitations on who can handle and make decisions about what happens at a crime scene. I'm happy to discuss that further offline if that would help.
There's another related question. Are there current efforts in place by the network to ensure wildlife forensics is incorporated in curriculums of wildlife training institutions in Africa and the world over, or even other institutions of higher learning where wildlife courses are offered?
I can answer that if you like.
Yeah, go Simon.
Yes is the short answer. So particularly in collaboration with Trace and NFI, we are trying to embed some of the work that has been done by the network in developing the guidebook and in developing techniques into institutions that are training. So we will be going out to Tanzania. Obviously COVID is a bit of a slowdown on everything, but we're trying to get some trainer programs running there and test some of the material that has been developed to see how well it works, and make sure that the quality of training is up to the standards required for court, essentially.
There are also some more academic online training courses available in the field of wildlife forensics, which, you know, if you Google, you should find them. So it's very much an applied discipline, and it's very much a growing area. So giving people hands-on training at the moment is kind of the priority in country and in their labs and at you know, in their own field environments. But gradually institutionalizing this is clearly recognized as a priority, because there simply aren't enough trainers in this group at the moment to satisfy the training needs. So we need a pyramid structure. We need trainers trained as a priority, and that's both a wildlife crime scene, but also wildlife lab as well.
If I may just come in there also, we are aware of some of the initiatives that are starting in some of the institutions in Africa, and they have started developing some of the curricula that will deal with wildlife forensics, and we hope that we will be able to play a role in guiding the process such that the product of their work is actually spot on in terms of providing the kind of training that is needed for wildlife forensics.
Thanks, Armand. Okay, another question for you, Simon, on the Lion Localizer. Is it an ongoing project, or are you done? Is it possible to engage us when you're in Botswana for capacity building? I'm interested in learning more about it, especially our local lions.
Okay, so currently it's an ongoing project, and we're still finishing it. We've got most of the kind of the initial data that we need to set it live. There's some work going on in the background, but yes, it will be going live soon. I won't put a date on it just yet. And then it will be ongoing. A lot of the data that goes into, well, not a lot, but there is a large amount of data from Botswana. My work when I was doing my PhD was in Botswana, so we've got some nice work from that and from other research that's been done. But certainly it would be great to engage. And actually, if they want to email me about it, I'll drop them a line when this is finished and see if we can engage. Certainly.
Great. Okay, final question to Jessica. How do you perform analysis of cyanide in water samples?
For cyanide samples, we use a field test, which is a sodium picrate field test. So as long as the water sample is fairly fresh in terms of when the cyanide was put into it, it will give you a result which is a qualitative test, not a quantitative test. And we can use this on other samples as well. If you have a carcass that's relatively fresh, you can use it for stomach contents to tell you whether or not that animal ingested the cyanide.
Thanks, Jessica. I think we're at our last question. Do you, and it's an easy one, do you think that the African Wildlife Forensics Network has been integral to getting labs to start doing casework? The answer has to be yes.
The answer is yes, indeed. And I think there are some difficulties, though. Although the network is working in that sense, in the sense that the labs that are involved should be able to start doing casework, we have to acknowledge that depending on the countries where the labs are located, the situation can be different and sometimes even difficult in terms of the administration and the laws in the country. So it takes a bit of time to have newly established labs or even institutions that want to establish labs. It takes a bit of time to go through all that administration to be to a point where they will be able to do casework.
Anything to add, Rob?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think we've had some real successes. The network itself doesn't have resources to go into countries and develop labs. There are other organizations such as NFI and Trace that can do that. What we're trying to do is provide a support network for practitioners, and so by helping people move between labs and learning techniques, by supporting the involvement of new countries, we definitely see some changes. Botswana, for example, has in the space of the last 12 months has gone from not doing casework to doing casework in its labs. And I think hopefully that's partly down to its involvement in the African Wildlife Forensics Network and the encouragements it's received from that kind of work and the resources and help. So there are definitely some good examples of where direct successes are coming out of the network.
Okay, maybe we have time for a final question that's just come in from Cargo. As a way to sustainability, shouldn't the network engage some of the more committed countries to help in funding?
Well, if I can start before Rob takes over there, if I can start there, I think we need first to be able to define a model, a functioning model on which we all agree as members of the network to say, okay, this is the direction we want to take. Once we have defined that model and we decide, for example, that membership should become, I don't know, a paying membership, or I don't know, as a way of sustainability, then we will have a clear answer to the question. But I think we are still at the very beginning. There's still a lot of discussion that must go on in terms of the model that we want to have for the network in terms of its sustainability. And once we manage to answer some of these questions, then we will be able to know what to do in the next few years.
Okay, more questions. Rob, it's 2 minutes to 2 or 3.
Depending on where we are. Yeah, no, I think we probably draw this to an end. There still seem to be quite a few people attending, which is fantastic. So yeah, thank you very much again to all of our presenters. It's a surprising amount of hard work to put together this many videos, to splice them all together, to make sure they all flow. So everyone's put in a huge amount of work in the background on this. And thank you very much also for taking the time out to come and listen and see and learn a little bit about the African Wildlife Forensics Network. We're really grateful. We hope that we've encouraged you rather than put you off. And if you've got interests and you think you have anything that you can offer or benefit from in terms of interacting with us, then please do get in touch, reach out to Armand, who you've got email address for. Visit the African Wildlife Forensics Network, which is a website, which is africanwildlifeforensics.org. And yeah, I think we'll leave you there. So thank you very much for coming.